So this is how to start beekeeping treatment-free, because I get a lot of questions about that. This might be, for a lot of you in here that have a couple years experience, a lot of this is going to be completely old and irrelevant to you, so bear with me. This is more for the very new beekeeper, or somebody who's hasn't started yet. Is there anybody that doesn't have bees yet and is looking to get into it? You? Okay. Yeah, this is probably more for you. All right, so we talked about this. This is just kind of a lot of times these talks are done singly, just by themselves in like an evening beekeeping meeting, so there's going to be some overlap. I tried not to repeat too much stuff. But this is a fun graph that I look at every year. I try to keep track of the loss rates between treating beekeepers and non-treating beekeepers. So as you can see, the average loss for someone who didn't treat is 35.4%. The average loss for somebody who did treat is 32.2%. This is last winter, not this winter, but last winter's numbers. And this is for people who identify themselves as backyard or hobbyist beekeepers. So that's an important thing. This doesn't include commercial beekeepers or sideliners. So as you can see, the idea that if you treat your bees, they'll survive, and if you don't treat, they'll die, is not quite accurate. Because there's a lot of people who treat that still lose, that's almost a third. And the people who didn't treat, just more than a third. It's not that big of a difference. Again, this is on average. You can't expect to reproduce these results necessarily. This is throughout the country. Different, like I said, all beekeeping is local. But that's just to point out that that old meme about cause and effect. Just think about that. Yeah?
Would it be a true statement to say that a lot of those losses are not necessarily due to whether you treat it or not, being a new beekeeper or backyard?
Yes, I would say that.
Yeah, what I found is we have a lot of people in our particular club that they'll say, well, I treated last week. Mm. So they treat improperly.
Yeah.
They do treat. Or, their bees starved out. They didn't know their hive was queenless. They have a whole gamut of reasons why. And so, those, I think more true to that is if you're a new beekeeper, it's not whether you treat or not, but this is what you're going to expect. Mm-hmm. What we see across the board, what the death rate is for new beekeepers.
Yeah. Exactly. In case you haven't heard, we didn't really treat bees before the 1950s when they first came out with a couple of treatments for American foul brood, which, as I mentioned, don't work because you can't kill the spores. So again, this is kind of rehashing some old material. Throughout history, people have kept bees in gums, which is logs, skeps. If you're interested in skeps, if you're familiar with what a skep is, it's a hive that's built out of coiled hay or grass that's wrapped up and built like a basket. And there's actually people getting into that again. It's been a lost art for a while, and people are getting into building those again as a way to keep bees more like in the old methods. And there's actually some videos on YouTube from Germany that there was a skep beekeeping operation in Germany up until at least the 70s. It's very interesting to watch those videos. You learn a lot more than just skep beekeeping. You learn how they kept bees and things that have been lost. Because don't kid yourself, there is information that has been lost about how to keep bees, even within the last 100 years. Not everything is available out on the internet. There's some fun stuff that you can learn around. So one of the reasons why I recommend not treating is because it's complex and it's dangerous and it's work, and I'm you might say, efficient person, or you might say lazy. I really, whatever you want to do. But if there's something that doesn't need to be done, I prefer not to do it. And so if I can find a way to do something efficiently without having to do extra work, I like to do that. Even can be a little bit anal about it sometimes. I'm the guy that walks around the house and turns the lights off, you know, that guy. And probably complains about it too loudly and annoys my family. So close the door. The other thing with treating is some of the treatments are pretty toxic. Fortunately, people are getting into, even the treating people are getting into less toxic treatments, like oxalic acid and some other things. That's good, that's great, but again, like I talked earlier, it's about the bees. It's not about protecting me from chemical exposure. It's about them and being able to survive on their own. It's good to protect myself from chemical exposure. It's good to protect everybody from chemical exposure, but that's not the ultimate purpose. That's just a nice side effect. And more importantly, it doesn't always work. And we talked about this a little bit before, so we can move on, save some time. One of the things I like to tell people is, I get a lot of people who start on my Facebook group who are interested in getting started, and they haven't started yet, and they'd like to learn some information. That's really good. In fact, I would recommend to people who are just starting, you can tell this to people as well, if you want to start and you decided you wanted to start like in the spring, I would recommend waiting until the next year. That'll give you the opportunity to learn some more, read some more, talk to people. I really recommend you get your hands in someone else's hive before you start, because you might be one of those people who discovers that they have a phobia of swarming insects, which is interestingly a natural human phobia, right? Like snakes. There's a lot of people who are scared of snakes. There's a really good reason to be scared of snakes. Phobia means irrational fear, but let's face it, there are some snakes out there that can really mess you up. Same thing with swarming insects. You might decide you don't want to be a beekeeper, and that's great. In fact, I have a number of my swarm trap hosts who want to help the bees, but they don't want to be a beekeeper. And I tell them that's great. Like you're providing a service to help the bees, because when I do swarm traps, and I'll talk about this in the swarm trap talk, when I do swarm traps, I'm saving those bees in a suburban area from somebody who doesn't know any better trying to poison them, or them getting in someone's house and causing an expensive removal, which can kind of give bees a bad reputation. We don't want to spread that around. So and where I keep my bees is out in the country where they're not going to bother people, and that's helpful for everybody. So if you decide you don't want to be a beekeeper, that's great. There's still some things, if you want to help the bees, that you can really do to do that. Now, one of the things, we're all generally Americans in here, and we have a market-based economy that allows us to choose just about everything. You know, in this room, I don't see anybody who's dressed identically to someone else. You all can pick your own clothes, you pick your own style. I wear these hats. It's mostly because I sunburn really bad, easily. I'm a quarter Swedish, but also nobody else wears them, so that's me. And in fact, I'm indoors, so why am I wearing it? I don't know. But we all have choices. But the difference with our clothes is we have been wearing clothes for a long time. We know how to choose what clothes we like and what clothes we need. You guys, most of you have lived in this area for at least several years. You know what clothes you need to stay warm in the wintertime. You've all bought cars before. You probably know what you're looking for. The reason to take a car for a test drive is you know what you're looking for. You want to try it out, see if it's the car you want. If you're starting out in beekeeping, you don't have any idea you don't have the framework how to choose the way that you want to do things. So I recommend finding somebody who does things sort of in the direction that you want to do them, and copy them for the first year or two. Because when you know the rules, then you can break them properly. If you don't know the rules and you're breaking the rules, then you're dangerous. So when I started out, my model was D. Lesby. I should have a picture of her in here. That would make sense. And the reason why I chose her is because at the time that I started, she was pretty much the only successful treatment-free beekeeper, and she had been that way since very early on. You know, she developed her methods and started publishing her work and did research and stuff in the 80s and early 90s. And she was accessible. She was on BeeSource. You could leave her a message and she would reply. She had her own Yahoo group and still does. So if you want to get a hold of her, that's where you find her. But now I've moved on from what she does, and I've figured out what works for me and what doesn't work for me in my area, because she's in the desert in Arizona and I'm in Mediterranean climate in Southern Oregon. So when you find some treatment-free guru or whoever that you want to emulate, you're going to have to build off of what they give you, because if they're not local, then they're not going to know how to keep bees here necessarily. So you can adjust, and the more you learn, the more you'll develop that framework in your own mind to make good decisions on what to do and how to do it. So there's some other options if you want to emulate somebody. Kirk Webster is a good example. He's up in Vermont, and he has some really good nuke raising methods. He's not really accessible. He doesn't do the internet thing, but if you call him at the right time of day, you can usually get a hold of him and he will talk to you. I had him on my podcast a while back, so you can check that episode out. It's really good. Sam Comfort, I talked to somebody who said they got bees from Sam Comfort. Yeah, you did too? Up in New York, and also I think he goes down to Florida as well, or used to. He's a lot of fun to hang out with, but he's a top bar beekeeper, so if you're interested in top bar hives, you can check out his website at Anarchy Apiaries. Michael Bush is another example. He keeps bees in 8-frame mediums for weight, because an 8-frame medium weighs about half of what a 10-frame deep does, full of honey, so that's good, especially if you have a bad back, or if you're concerned about having a bad back in the future. I fell out of a tree when I was 15, so that's a concern for me. I have a really nasty spot in my back that will put me out of commission for 2 or 3 days at a time once in a while. That wasn't the only tree I fell out of. No, it wasn't catching bees. I was climbing up to my tree house, and a branch broke, and down I went. I missed the county spelling bee because I messed up my back. Yeah. Spelling was not my career of choice. Tracy Smith is a person that I just met up in Alaska this last weekend. She has got some really good information. She's from Alberta, Canada, up in the northern prairies, and she is a student of the old Canadian overwintering methods, which is because of how cold it gets up there and the conditions. There's really short season that they have and really long winter. She's got some very interesting stuff to talk. She's going to be on the podcast upcoming here in the next couple of weeks, so you can get some information from her. Jacqueline Freeman is in just north of Portland, Oregon. She keeps multiple different types of hives. She has more of a, I don't want to be disrespectful to anybody, so I'm just going to say more of a spiritual approach to beekeeping. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, she's got a book called Song of Increase or something like that. So if you're interested in that, she's a good resource. She's also been on the podcast. Les Crowder just was on the podcast just recently. He's a top bar beekeeper he was in New Mexico, but now he's in Texas. And he's got a book or two out also. And a lot of these people, Jacqueline, Les, and I think Tracy also are on my treatment-free beekeeping Facebook group. So you can talk to them there also. Again, why do I do this? It's confusing what not to do, then I do all these double negatives. Maybe I need to fix that. Get advice from local beekeepers, definitely. Don't take everything you find on the internet as gospel, because it is not. A lot of times you will find people on the internet who are acting as experts, and you will find that they are in their first year of beekeeping and that all of their knowledge is book learning, and they don't know anything about how to do things in real life. Watch out for those people. Don't be one of those people. Yeah, that's the next one. And like I said before, don't just not treat and expect everything to come out happy. I love when people come up and tell me that they're trying to get as many hives as possible, because I really think that that is the way to go. Act like you are trying to be a commercial beekeeper. You will learn a whole lot, and you'll get more hives, and it's really easy to reduce the number of hives once you figured out that you have too many than it is to try and come back from losing a bunch. Right? It makes things so much easier. I talked a little bit about this earlier with the 60%. More hives. So this is the starter kit. Lots of you are already past this point, so you can glaze over for a minute. I tell people not to buy the traditional starter kit because there's going to be some things that you don't need. And I think I talk about the things that you don't need. What is the next slide? Yeah, there we go. We'll get to that in a minute. First of all, virtually all starter kits come with a Langstroth hive, and you might decide that ultimately you don't want to use a Langstroth hive. A Langstroth hive is a hive that was developed. The original hive that Langstroth developed back in the mid-1800s is not the hive that we use today. Langstroth lived in Illinois, I think. So if you don't live in Illinois, it may not be optimal for you. And the modern Langstroth hive is a hive that's developed for modern commercial migratory beekeeping. So if you are not a commercial migratory beekeeper, it also may not be the hive for you. Top bar hives are fun for a lot of people who want to get into the hive often and not disturb the hive too much. There's also listed on that little card over there that's going to be next weekend in Philly is Leo Sharashkin, who promotes the Lands hive, which is a hive that you can build yourself out of basic materials for less than $50. If you have any sort of woodworking ability or know somebody who does, you might be interested in that because it's a lot cheaper and it's a big single box hive. So that might be something better. You can't get that in a starter kit. You can buy it from him, or you can build it yourself. He has the plans for free on his website. So I recommend people buying only what they need. A lot of times, the book that you get, for instance, is not a treatment-free beekeeping book. In fact, I don't know of any starter kit that gives you a treatment-free beekeeping book. So if you want to start with a book, buy another book. Or like for instance, Michael Bush's book is actually his website. So if you want to read his book, just go read his whole website. It's free and it's digital. And he also has a bunch of other books that are out of copyright, some older books on beekeeping from guys like Jay Smith that teach you all you ever need to know about rearing queens. Guys like Hubert in French. And some of those older books from back in the 1800s that not many people read anymore just because they are old. But beekeeping is still beekeeping. It's virtually the same as it was back then. They didn't have Varroa, so that's something to think about. I say smoker on here. That's not because you don't need a smoker. That's because the smoker that you get in a starter kit is often the tiny one. Really small smoker. The smaller the smoker, in my experience, the harder it is to light and the harder it is to keep lit. So if you want to be a beekeeper, be serious about it, just spend the extra $5 or $10 and get the commercial smoker. It's much easier to light, keep lit, it'll stay lit for a long time. It only costs a few bucks more. Just go for the big one. Hive tool, there are half a dozen or so different styles of hive tools, so the one that you get in a kit might not be the one that you're interested in. Or you might decide that you have a chisel or some sort of other tool that you want to use instead. I actually found hive tools in a Pet Boys in Denver labeled as a pry bar. So you may be able to find those somewhere else for slightly cheaper. Also on hive tools, I recommend not getting the stainless steel ones. The spring steel ones will be easier to sharpen and keep sharp. They don't look as pretty, you know, they're going to get a little rust patina on them, but their sharpness is better in my opinion. I keep bees without gloves. I don't wear gloves. A lot of people are shaking their heads. That's okay, no problem. But for me, keeping bees without gloves helps me to keep aware of what the bees are doing. It has taught me to pay attention to their attitude, and so I'm not messing with them when they don't want to be messed with. I know when they're angry, I know when it's time to get out of the hive. It's really good instant feedback. If you're wanting to understand how a hive can get mean, or when they're starting to get mean, you know, one of the things you can do is like wave your hand gently over an open hive, and if you got bees coming out and hitting you, that's time to start thinking about figuring out if there's something wrong or if they're getting mean or something like that. If they're flying straight up and stinging you immediately, that's maybe time to requeen, because that's too mean of a hive to have fun with. And with gloves, you tend to be a little more clumsy. You squish bees more. You squish a bee, you're going to get bee guts on it, and that's going to make more bees angry as you go along. Gloves are also almost impossible to sterilize completely. Something to think about. Unless you can also use nitrile gloves or latex gloves, and they work pretty well. They're not quite as sting resistant. They also get sticky and sweaty and stuff. Queen excluder. I don't use a queen excluder. So when it's included in a kit and you don't use it, that means you've wasted some money. That'll be up to you and your beekeeping style. You know, read something or talk to your mentor and figure out how you want to do that. We could talk about that if you want, but the reasons why I don't use it. The other thing is most kits come pre-assembled and you're paying for the assembly. If you can use a hammer and nails, you can usually assemble it yourself. Or maybe you want to use glue and screws like I do, and you want the hive to stick together better. You get that option when you assemble the hive yourself. So the next question is where to get bees. I am highly against packages for the reasons that we discussed earlier. So this is the graph that I was talking to you about. You can see the difference between packages, swarms, splitting, nukes, and hives. Now the things on here that cost money are packages, nukes, and hives. Most people don't buy hives just because they're usually not for sale. Once in a while you can buy a hive from an older beekeeper who's retiring or something like that. Usually not available. Usually what you can get are packages and nukes. Packages have a very high loss rate, and so like we talked earlier about, I recommend avoiding those. Swarms, you can see the loss rate is about the same as if you split your own bees. So those are the two options that I recommend the most. And I will be talking about how to catch swarms here in a talk coming up. That's really fun. I really enjoy catching swarms. It's like fishing. It's like a 3-month-long fishing expedition. So it's really fun, and it's free, and that's always the best part. Yeah, so that's basically what we've talked about before. Treatment-free nukes are good. I also don't recommend buying queens. Again, with a sort of cafeteria mindset on how we do things, we want to buy one queen from everywhere and bring them all here, and then we can decide which one we like the most, etc. The problem with that I've noticed is that when you bring bees from elsewhere and they requeen themselves, they start to hybridize with your local bees, you can get mean hives. There's a couple reasons for that. I'm not sure what exactly is the case, but I've heard a few theories. One is that different castes of bees within the hive can get upset at each other. They do things differently and they don't get along. They don't work together, and so that can end up in a mean hive. Hives can also, especially, I bought some queens from Zia Queen Bee in New Mexico, and the queens that I got were pretty good. That was 2011. That's the last bees that I ever bought and ever planned to buy. So that's notable. But the queens that, when those queens were superseded, they were mean, really mean. I don't know if that was because of Africanized bee genetics or whatever happened there, but when I can't work a hive because it's so mean, that's not having fun anymore, so I don't want to do that. Your best option is to go with bees from here, even if they're swarms from hives that you don't know or might be junk. It's still free. Free junk is better than expensive junk. Yeah.
Both Montgomery County and Chester County have queen cell programs
Great.
where they're raising local queens, survivor queens, queens of various like DSH and other characteristics. They're cherry picking the best hives in the areas and taking cells from there to create queen cells. They
Awesome.
sell them at very, very inexpensive rates to
Awesome. Yeah,
to their club members.
yeah, local stuff is always better. Not everybody has that. There's a lot of areas in this country where there are no local queen producers, much less local treatment-free queen producers. So if you've got a resource like that, that's good.
It's not necessarily treatment-free, but they're trying to improve the genetics towards that direction.
Good. Awesome. Well, we talked about this before. Don't over-inspect. This is again for new beekeepers again. Learn to increase a lot. I'm going to talk about that in the next talk about, or is it that next one? Whichever one it is. I'll be talking about more of that later. And one of my goals is to learn something new and do something new every year. That's how I learned how to graft. And I recommend people try that. A lot of people are scared of it. That's one of those humps that's difficult to get over. I'm not sure why. It's a small thing. Maybe people are concerned about their eyesight or the fragility of a larva. Trust me, larvae are way more durable than you think. I've heard of a number of cases where people have grafted larvae into a cell bar and then forgot it somewhere for several days, and then went and looked at it and put it back in their hive, and the bees raised queens with it, and they were fine. You'd be amazed the sort of thing, fun stuff that can happen. It's really, I look at it like this, it's like taking a very small spoon and moving a very small Cheerio from one very small bowl to another very small bowl. If you can think about it like that, I think you can get over it, yeah.
I am going to be listening very carefully when you start talking about swarm traps. But for the person who is just going to get into this, 4 months ago is when I decided this is what I'd like to try next.
Mm-hmm.
Other than buying a package, when you know no one that's in bees, I do now, and you have no experience with anybody else out there that's ever been in it, where does a person go to even get started? To get a package, other than a package?
Other than a package, like I said, find a beekeeper. Not everywhere are there beekeepers, but most places. I mean, even in Alaska, they keep bees, which is amazing because there are people up there that told me that bees can't survive, and then there's other ones that tell me that they found a bee hive in a tree that was several years old. So you never know who to believe in those situations. But there have been people that have started completely just from a book, and that first time that they go out and catch a swarm or something can be quite a learning experience. But it can be done. That was the way that it was done, in years past. If your father didn't keep bees and you wanted to keep bees and you had no other idea what to do, you would go find yourself a hollow log and cut it out of a tree and haul it home maybe. Or find a swarm hanging in a tree and dump it into a hollow log or something. So it can be done. It just, it takes some doing, or it takes some courage, let's say, to get it, but it can be done.
Well, I read the book. I've never ever seen a swarm,
Okay.
so that's where I'm at.
Well, there are people in this room I know that catch swarms and would probably be happy to take you along on an adventure.
That's why I'm here.
Awesome. Yeah, anybody wants to teach him how to catch swarms, come talk to him. Blue Hawaiian shirt right here. All right, so because there's what I'm going to be getting into with the rapid expansion methods and things like that, those are the things that I talk about and also with the swarm. So that information is covered in those later talks. So we'll get to that in a minute. But for now, do you have any questions? Yeah.
You talk about increasing as much as possible. If you have a couple of hives, how often can you split in order to make a new hive? And does that decimate what's left in the old part of the hive?
How often can you split, and does that decimate the old part of the hive?
I'm concerned that I don't have enough bees, that if I split off 2 frames with some of the bees and leave the bees that are left with a couple of frames, that they'll both fail.
Usually in a climate like this, which is fairly reasonable for bees in the spring and summer, you should be able to do that without a problem. 2 frames might not be enough frames for your particular area, depending on your climate. Like for instance, when I was in Arkansas, I could make a nuke with 1 frame of foundation, 1 frame of honey, and 1 frame of brood with a queen cell in there. And the queen cell would hatch out and go mate and come back, and within a month or so, that little 3-frame nuke would be wanting to swarm on me. In Oregon, I can't do that. It's too cool in the spring to be able to do that, so I need at least 2 frames of brood and 1 frame of honey. Here, I don't know exactly what your situation is. You may need more, you may need 5 frames, but one of the things that you can do instead of taking 1 hive and splitting it half and half or half and part is you can take a couple of frames of brood out of 2 or more hives, or if you've got 5, you can take 1 frame of brood out of each of those 5 hives to start another one. And those other 5 will replace that frame of brood in a week or 2. And then a week or 2 later, you can do it again and again until your season is, and you can make quite a number of splits that way. Yeah.
Will the bees follow the frame into the new nuke box, and will different hive bees tolerate each other with the brood?
Generally, when you put bees from different hives into a 3rd hive, they will know immediately that they're not in their home hive, and they will give up defending anything. Bees that are nurse bees that have never been outside the hive will not fly back to their home hive, but bees that have been out before, foragers, will fly back to their home hive. So you can use that to your advantage and do things like if you're making a half and half split, you can switch their places occasionally so that you can kind of even out where they're going. Yeah.
To stop that, you could move them much further apart. Like
Yeah,
4
also.
miles.
Yeah, the typical rule is you can move them 2 miles apart. Not everybody has the opportunity to do that, so I don't always mention that. But yeah, if you split a hive and take it 2 miles away, those bees that are 2 miles away now have no framework of reference to get back to their home hive, and so that's now their home hive. Okay? Yeah.
I just want to give a data point. I did a couple of nukes this spring where I had 2 frames of, these are medium frames too, they're smaller, 2 frames of brood and nurse bees only, and a queen cell. And then I fed the hive, and I did that twice and successfully created pretty good
Awesome, so that works.
hives out. So we're not that When we get into April, when we get into May, it doesn't take that much to get a hive going. But
Great.
if you don't have the foragers with it, you have to feed it, otherwise the nurse bees
Right.
won't be able to survive.
Yeah. Bruce?
There was a point up there where it said, don't just stop treating, which some might take as mean kind of keep treating a little bit. Can you clarify what you mean by don't just stop?
Yeah. When I say don't just stop treating, I'm not an advocate of tapering off treating. All that's going to do is be treating that's less and less effective. So that's not going to help you. What I mean by don't just stop treating is don't just stop treating treated bees and expect everything to be fine. I've actually heard people, they treat treatment-free as a different method of treating. I know that sounds odd. I've actually had people ask me about treatment-free treatments. This is true. And so what I'm talking about is with this whole thing that I'm developing this whole afternoon is a change in mindset and a change of how you're doing. So instead of just stopping treating, I would say also split your hives and also catch swarms and also don't just buy stuff to replace what you've lost. Again, we're chipping away at the block of marble to find the statue inside. So we have to lose some hives. That's a fact of life. There is no adaptation without death. Okay, so if you just stop treating and don't do anything else differently, the hive's probably going to die. You can do other things like brood breaks. I don't have any of that in my talks today about how to do that, but if you check out online, see some methods how to do that. You can do brood breaks, and that will help you reduce the number of mites in a hive. So I would recommend that for like a first-year beekeeper who's not starting with treatment-free bees or swarms. And long-term, I don't want you to do that because it's helping the bees when they should survive on their own. But in the short term, until you get through that first winter and you have bees to split the next year, you might do some things like that. Yeah.
So would you say, in addition to that, it's taking away certain treatments like your chemical, like your soft and hard chemical treatments and certain feeding options, but also your level of intervention or manipulation of the hives has to at least stay the same and maybe increase even more if you have to split more or you have disease or stuff like that?
Yeah, treatment-free beekeeping is not giving up beekeeping. It's not stopping to do the normal stuff that we do trying to maintain our bees in hives. It's just stopping the treating part. You know, I get people that say, well, a hive is a treatment. No, a hive is beekeeping. We're just getting away from the parts that remove the bees' abilities to be able to handle things themselves. Somebody asked during the break about how to wean bees off of treatments that have been treated. There's a couple things I'd recommend. Again, what I was talking about earlier with changing your mindset, going for the idea of splitting hives and increasing your number of hives, rather than just trying to keep a stable population. In nature, there is no stable population. There's no population of any kind of animals that remains the same over time. In good years, you know, pick a species, buffalo. In good years, a lot of calves survive. They run fast and get away from the wolves, etc. Bad years, may not get enough to eat. Some calves don't survive. Some slow ones get picked off by wolves. The population shrinks. At the same time, good years, the wolves are doing great. Bad years, wolves not doing so great. So think about that in a dynamic sense rather than saying, I just have 2 hives. That may be your goal, but think about doing that as the goal coming out of winter, not going into winter. So splitting, if you've had a hive that's been treated with the old nasty chemicals, think about replacing more of your comb to get that stuff out of there that's been absorbed into the comb. Especially the older comb is going to have a lot of that soaked in there. And while I can't tell you precisely in a scientific sense what kind of effect that has on the bees, clean comb is better. We know that. Lots of anecdotal evidence shows that people that start out with clean comb can do better than people that start out with old used commercial stuff. What else? Yeah.
When you are creating your nukes, do you typically move the queen to the nuke? Or do you allow them, the old hive, the mother hive, to raise a new queen? Or do you typically just move the eggs and let the nuke raise their new queen?
In that specific case, if I'm doing like a walk-away split, which I'll talk about in one of the upcoming talks, I would generally put the queen with the new hive because she's going to be able to retain more of the workers. More of the workers will want to stay with her rather than go to the old one, and then let the old one raise the new queen.